Um, Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining us. And thank you for joining us on this session. My name is Zakaria Yusuf. I'm the Executive Director at Care Governance Project, a non-profit organization working on policy research and advocacy in Africa. We are hosting this webinar event as part of the global dialogue on AI governance taking place between today and tomorrow in Geneva. This is the first global dialogue on AI governance. And we are so privileged to be having this opportunity to convene this official online site event. So in this session, we are going to be focusing on harmonizing AI governance, standard transparency, and African cooperation. So in the current cycle of consensus among AI governance stakeholders, there is emerging consensus on the need for standardization across AI, including on testing, documentation, and reporting, as standard play a key role in ensuring reliability, safety, and interoperability. So in this session, we are hoping to discuss on current practice in AI standardization in Africa, and to also learn on what are some of the key challenges or bottleneck to meaningful cooperation to international norm setting within the Africa, as well as how African stakeholders can effectively engage in international AI standard development. So as an agenda, as we are round up with this brief introduction, we're going to move into panel discussion where for our panelists, Brian Omwega, Dr. Victor Omuyiwa, and then Okot Monica, who will be taking some of the questions, and afterwards, we're going to be moving into Q&A session before we round up this discussion. So we are hoping like this will take us in the next 1 hour to finalize. But before then, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and give a brief introduction. Then from there, we can move into the main discussion. For the participant, feel free to use the discussion that is Q&A when the session begins to send your questions. And then we'll get to that as the session progresses. So without further ado, I will introduce our first panelist, Dr. Victor Odumiwa, for an introduction. And Dr. Victor, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zach. And good day, everyone. I'm Victor Odumiwa from the University of Lagos. I'm an AI researcher and AI developer, and at the same time, I also contribute to policy and to strategy development. I was part of those that drafted the Nigerian AI strategy. And with Zach, we've done with Tech Governance Project, we've done a kind of AI policy, a kind of fellowship, AI governance fellowship before in Nigeria. And also, I run a tech innovation hub in the University of Lagos, where we also are raising talents, AI talents, and also tech talents in general. And at the same time, startups, tech startups, and building the next solutions, we believe, for Nigeria, for the continent. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Victor. So great to have you here. Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Zachary. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Brian Omwenga. I'm the founder and team lead of a AI tech startup called the Tech Innovators Network, where we build integrated solutions, and we also build ecosystem solutions from a community perspective. I also consult on matters tech policy. It's also involved in the formulation of the Kenya AI strategy, amongst other policy documents here in Kenya. But beyond that, also involved at sector level. And at sector level in Kenya, I also sit as the vice chair of the ICT sector board for the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, representing the private sector. And at Africa level, I also sit as the chair of the Technical Committee 46 that sets Africa standards at the Africa Standardization Organization. Thank you, and happy to be here.
Okay, so great to have you as well, Brian. And then we have with us Monica Okot. And so I think due to some technical issue, Monica video will be up, but hopefully as we progress, maybe the issue will be resolved. Monica, over to you.
I hope my audio is working though. Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Monica Okoth. I work for the Kenya Bureau of Standards. That's the national standards body of Kenya. I work within the standards development department. I've been working in this department. So I have for the last 15 years, so I have about 15 years of standardization experience. So we began standardization, ICT standardization with a technical committee 94, where we started with software standards, and we included AI standards, I think around 2019, 2020. So as a committee, as a secretary of the committee, I lead the committee to develop national standards. And then we have a few national mirror committees where we mirror international standards under the ISO and ICT JTC1. That's the Joint International Technical Committee on Information Technology. So we mirror a few committees under that international committee. And recently we have started standardization within the region. That's the African Regional Standardization Organization, ARSO. So I'm the secretary to that committee as well. And additionally, we have the African AFSEC, the African Electrotechnical Commission for Standardization, which is in charge of electrotechnical standards, where we are now starting initiatives towards AI standardization. Yeah, so in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you, Monica, for the introduction. So without further ado, we'll also dive into our discussion for the day. I think Monica, you don't have to go. I will start with you. I think to begin this discussion on standardization, transparency, and African stakeholders cooperation on international AI standards, let us take a look back and what are the current landscape and why do we kind of like even need standards? So Monica, can you briefly discuss why do robust standards become necessary in governing AI, particularly in mitigating critical risks, such as like cyber threat, bio threat, or loss of human control?
Yeah, I hope I've not put my audio off. Yeah, so maybe I can start with the history of why AI standards were introduced in the first place, because AI is an application, just like software. So specifically in the international governance scene, software standards have been developed for quite a while. and standards are normally developed in terms of their characteristics. So within the international standardization scene, software standards have always been designed around things like functional completeness, correctness, appropriateness, performance efficiency, how usable they are, how reliable, and security. And then when AI emerged and started evolving, there was an issue towards the characteristics that were now specific to AI. They were no longer software characteristics that can be controlled. They were now non-functional characteristics. Then we had to introduce things like robustness, human in the loop, how to intervene, and user controllability and transparency. And those were issues that traditional software was not having. And so we needed to come up with standards that were non-functional, that were specific to artificial intelligence. And so this is why we need to have robust standards in AI. We need to make sure in terms of cyber threats, we know that we have models that are becoming capable of finding vulnerabilities, writing their own code, automating attacks. And so this is why we need to have standards to have a consistent way to ensure that the standards are not crossing the line. Things like biothreats, we need to make sure that we entrench risk assessment within the development framework so that we have minimal risks and AI capabilities can be governed within a risk framework. And also for biothreats, we know that people have misused AI models widely, and this can cause a catastrophe. And that's why we need to have standards with regards to controllability, ensuring there's a human in the loop. And because conventional software originally did not have to override, cannot be overridden. So that's why basically we need to have robust standards in AI as opposed to other applications like software.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Monica, for sharing those perspectives. To ensure like safety, robust oversights, and also like responsible innovation, which I think are quite important. Thank you for mentioning that. Brian, let me move to you. So Monica discussed about like why standards are important. So from your own perspective, what is the current focus of African AI standard development? And where do you think most urgent gap, or where do you think gaps are? And what are the most urgent needs to further kind of like ensure robust standardization within the continent?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for that question, Zachariah. And also to just pick up from where Monica left off, I think as part of the introduction of standardization is simply the realization and appreciation that standardization is truly an exercise of dialogue and harmonization amongst experts. So there's quite an element of expert input, which for me is one of the reasons why I think standardization is an easier policy direction to take in the governance of AI, as opposed to probably creating laws or creating other forms of policy documents. You might think about it this way: it's a bit easier to explain safety and constitutionalism to a software engineer than it is to explain an AI model to a politician. I mean, this you can just see the kind of challenges you would have to try and explain something extremely and highly technical probably to a non-technical politician. But it will be easy because it's a matter of ethics that involves each and every one of us to explain constitutionalism and safety to the software engineers themselves. I think with that said, let me just say that the technical committee of IT that was created at ARSO is a very young committee. It's a committee that was created about a month ago. So the current emphasis within the committee is to structure ourselves properly for purposes of managing the large work that is going to be ahead of us. And beyond managing that work is also managing the discourse and the conversation across 52 member states, or some 50 odd member states, right? So that happens to be one of the primary pieces of work that we're doing currently. But then beyond that, the thought, of course, especially around AI, is to ask ourselves how to approach it. And the three areas of approach that we think should be prioritized is number one, standards around the development process of AI. So standardization around the developer and given codes of practice that developers should have. And then probably some standards around inputs into AI, such as standards around data and tools around data. And then, of course, one of the biggest spaces, being that it's Africa as well, is to discuss around use cases, standardization around use cases, and where AI is applied and how AI can be applied safely. So for the time being, I think that will be the emphasis for us at Africa level.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Brian, for sharing the insight on foreign purpose and where the kind of like needs for other kind of like development of the standards. So let us briefly kind of like talk about the reality and the implementation gap. Why we are discussing about the need for standards, we see like the kind of like African AI ecosystem is kind of like still emerging. So Dr. Victor, you see it at the intersection of like academia, research, and also industry, as well as like a policy ecosystem. Where do you see gap between standards and what actually like what is on the paper, for example, like a standard on the paper, and startup or AI ecosystem in Africa can actually implement, or kind of like will be able to like be in compliance with those standards?
Yeah, thank you so much, Zach, and thank you, my co-panelist, for setting the stage. For me, the first thing I will say is even if you look at Africa generally, how many countries in Africa already have a strategy, AI strategy? Not so many. How many have AI policy? Not so many as well. Now, strategy and policy are good things, but yet they are not yet the ones creating the standard for us. Yeah. So how many of them already have bills sent to their maybe Senate? How many? Very few, even if they exist. How many have acts? I'm not sure of any act yet in Africa. I don't know. I may be wrong. How many now have regulations? So you discover the layers are there, and we are not yet even doing well in all those layers. Now talk less of having standards. Yeah. So I want to say that standards are very good, and I support it, because without standards, how do you measure what you are doing, your compliance? Without standards, even how can government be able to regulate without standards? So standards are very good. Yeah, but unfortunately, what I'm trying to say is that we are still far away. I mean, we are still dealing with strategy and policy. So we are still far away. Then, now, the problem we may have is standards are becoming maybe kind of following what they are doing in the EU. And the problem we have is that that may not work for us. So imagine a startup of 2, 3 people working together, trying to create something, and you're giving us a standard that you are giving to the likes of OpenAI, the likes of what do you call them? What do you call it? Anthropic. You can see that's going to be a big problem. Yeah. So standards are good, but you have to make sure that the standard, we also try to scale it down based on where you're operating from, at what level you're operating from. So I believe that as we strive to create standards, number one, harmonization is important, because when as a startup, you have 3, 4, 5 different things you are looking at, you're confused. You don't know what to do. This one, there's a regulation about data governance, a regulation comes about AI governance, another one comes about this, and there are standards, and there are different bodies also giving those standards within even a country. You understand? You see one from CBN from Nigeria, example from CBN, doing something in fintech, and you're using AI. You see one from CBN, you see one from, so you become confused. It's stifling. It's even difficult for you to make progress. Yeah. Standards are good, but we need to look at all these factors and make sure that we're not just creating several things that will be a bottleneck for the developers. That is very important. And apart from that, I also think that one of the problems we're having is because when you look at standards now, we can look at the different things. So standard, let's say startups now, yeah, standard, good for them. But let's also look at all these big players in AI, yeah, that are even we're using their solution. Their solution is imported into our continent. If we look at standard at those 2 levels, it should be a bit different. Yeah. Many of our people that are even building a solution, they are just consuming API from those big global players. Yeah. So when you're standardizing, you have to look at what should be the standard for those big players, and what about those that are just consuming the solution those big players are providing, and they're using it to develop whatever they're doing to solve problems for us in Africa. So all those things have to be looked at for us to be able to have something concrete. And beyond that, I will soon conclude. It's good to create standards, but do we have the competency to be able to enforce those standards? That's another big gap. How do we enforce the standards? Who are the people that will understand the standard and they can actually enforce it? So there are so many things to look at for us to be able to really have good standards and ensure that those standards are enforced. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Victor, as well. I think you have unpacked a lot of realities and implementation challenge, especially when it comes to developing world. So it's good, like we also take those perspectives while we are trying to harmonize kind of like governance, including like on standardization. And you also made one important point regarding kind of like standard across, how can we strike the right balance between upstream and downstream the AI developer when creating those standards? What are the role for each stakeholders? That is quite interesting. So we are still on the aspect of like realities and the implementation gap. And Monica, I'm aware that you sit at the Secretariat of the ARSO TC 46. So what are some of the biggest obstacles do you think? I know like Dr. Victor has mentioned a lot of like implementation challenge and also like realities on the Africa, but what are some of the like biggest obstacles to producing kind of like a standard that member state can actually adopt within the Africa?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the experience I've had at the international level. We are members in almost 50% of the international technical committees, but we want to see, does this translate to having a say within the standardization field? We know that a standard is supposed to be a problem-solving tool. And when the problem is defined at the beginning of the standards development, it usually comes from the developed countries. They are quite ahead of us in terms of AI specifically. And so they define the problem. And what I've noticed is African countries come in after the problem has been defined at the international level. And so we are not able to include what our problems are at that level. We are not able to bring in data within the problem framing, the problem framing, the first step of standards development is problem framing. And if we're not able to bring in data, we're not able to bring in our research, we are not able to bring in the context, but we are included as members in those technical committees. It looks like it's a fair playing field, but when you look at it, we are given voting rights and we are given participation rights. But at the end of the day, how much power or how much of our problems are being solved at that level if we're just voting for other people's problems? So that has been one of the major challenges of African, at least Kenya, adopting standards that they were not included in at the beginning of the framing of the problem. So in terms of regional standardization, I think that would be some of our problems. When standards are brought in, when all countries have not stated their context, stated their problems, and are expected to adopt this at that high level, that would be an issue. That would be a challenge for many countries to see themselves as owning that standard. So I think we need to put in more effort towards bringing in data from all countries as we're developing the standards, as opposed to just saying countries are participating, they are present during the meetings, they are receiving documents, but they've not brought in their data. So I think that's one of the main challenges of standards being adopted at regional, international, and also national level. And then getting an expert pool of people to participate as they're harmonizing the documents is also a problem. So we need to have a situation where there's an expert pool who can participate continuously at meetings as the standard is being developed. Then probably more research needs to be done in Africa as we are framing the problem, framing the standards, drafting. And then digital capacity, basically, for digital standards. So I think that would be the challenges that would be faced at ARSO level as we are coming up with the harmonized common standards for the continent, in my opinion. Thank you.
Oh, that is great. Thank you for sharing, Monica. I think those are quite valuable perspective to share. Issue around like data, regulatory capacity, and also kind of like how can we improve coordination. I think those can actually be kind of like a good start to where maybe some of the implementation challenge and also realities we highlighted in this discussion maybe can be improved. So let me ask you, Brian, we discussed about like realities and implementation challenge, as well as like, for example, at the ARSO, also some of the obstacles they are currently facing with regard to like developing standards that member state can adopt. You see it at the intersection of policy and also trying to promote digital public infrastructures. I know like your work at Think. So how do you see the role of kind of like improved infrastructures in kind of like improving around kind of like actual adoption and the implementation of the standards within the continent? Do you think those may be help? What infrastructures do we need actually, aside from the technical capacity, what infrastructures are needed to further support the implementation and also effective kind of like adoption of those standards?
Thank you for that question, Zachary. I think this is also a very interesting question that also leads off from what Dr. Victor had mentioned earlier, which is the implementation challenge of the standards per se. I think one of the key work that we do at Think is actually looking for a way to make the standards very practical. And one of the ways we've found out, and in for all intents and purposes, conceptually, a discussion around digital public infrastructure is truly a discussion around standards, because essentially, even just the same way we understand infrastructure and harmonization of infrastructure is really the same conversation we have around DPIs. If you truly want to, from the very basic example of creating a road across different sections of the country or across different countries, you'll need to have a conversation about how wide the road is going to be, what kind of weight the road is supposed to take. And that is essentially a conversation that is a standards conversation for purposes of enabling that transportation infrastructure across the different countries. So that's essentially one of the things that we try and do, which is bring in community. And here I speak about actual practitioners. So we're talking of actual experts to have conversations around a mixture of technology and policy solutions that actually result in DPIs, that are actual DPIs that can help in let's say the creation of these platforms that can deliver some form of standardization across communities, across nations, etc. But something else that's also very important to just pick in the DPI conversation, when you look at some of the principles around DPIs, issues such as governance. So that DPI conversation sets off a conversation around governance, right? So unified governance across the DPI. The other principle is, for instance, a principle of openness, right? Which in this particular case also lends itself to a conversation across developers and across developer communities as well. And then, of course, other principles such as interoperability, which also stems out of the openness. So this DPI conversation can be thought of from a very practical, technical perspective. But also when you look at it from an operational perspective, it's actually a strategy that is also useful for scaling and startup scaling. We are looking at, I mean, if you were to think about 52 different countries, it is a nightmare to scale into those different countries. Let's call it that. And you can scale on top of big tech solutions, let me call it that, because they do deliver both more or less their tech policy vertical. Or we can have that conversation as techies and or as experts, and those conversations represent themselves as DPIs across these different communities. So for me, I think DPI is an important infrastructure to support the delivery of standards. And there's already some little bit of work that we're doing around this, I think. Yeah, back to you.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing, Brian. So for the attendee, within the next few minutes, we're going to move into the Q&A session. So if you have a question, please feel free to grab your question on the Q&A, and then we'll get to that very soon. So Brian, let me briefly also draw back and talk about some of the lessons that we can carry. So we are trying to harmonize AI and also have a robust standards. So you led Kenya AI Port of Practice development. Can you tell me what lesson from that process do you think we can take or country can take to apply in developing for example, like a country in Africa, what lesson can they take from that process? And also international standard development, what lesson should international communities also consider based on your lesson and experience from Kenya AI Code of Practice standard development?
So I will answer the first part of that question, and I will let Monica answer the other one, which is the international outlook. From our experience here in Kenya is that this was a work item. So we introduced these standards as work items. So it was a work item that we introduced into the conversation of standardization back in 2023. So the first thing that becomes very interesting is we started the conversation on the code of practice in 2023 and eventually got it gazetted in Kenya in 2025. It took us a whole 2 years to try and get the standard from drafting to public participation all the way to get it gazetted. The one thing that I think was very clear is that process required sector leadership. And this basically what I mean by strong sector leadership is the stakeholders who are involved in the standardization process. A lot of African countries have different priorities. In as much as we're discussing about a standard in AI, there are many other matters of priority that require guidelines and that require some form of standardization. So what you find is that the standardization process of creating the code of practice didn't have quite a lot of support, even from the government. And that what that led us to do is then we started seeking support from international partners. Through the support of the UK FCDO, we were able to even have all the different validation workshops and to go through the public participation comments that were received from as far and wide as you can believe. There were individuals who are interested in that code from the American Chamber of Commerce. So individuals from Microsoft and Google commented on it. The People's Republic of China also gave in comments. And you realize that a lot of this, the consideration of these comments and the eventual analysis of those comments require high expertise. The challenge, therefore, is that it's not a paid, it's actually not a paid job. It's a job that is driven by interest, almost to a certain level, national interest, and also interest in technology and policy in terms of that contribution. So I think that other area of the creation of technical committees and the involvement of experts within the country is something that needs to be encouraged. Unfortunately, it's a task that doesn't pay much, but it does quite a lot in terms of contributing to the industry. So for me, I'll say primarily those two. There was a lack of resourcing and typically sometimes a lack of support, but support did come in the form of donors, which is sometimes double-edged. But you do have donors like the UK FCDO who are happy to participate and not contribute or determine the outcome of the discussions. In terms of international, maybe Monica can add something. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Monica, maybe if you can say one or two things.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Maybe I'll just explain from the context of the Kenya Standard 3007. It was a standard that brought in, it was referencing a lot of international standards. We've seen that standards need to be able to be applied easily. And international standards are high-level documents. You find there's a standard talking about AI lifecycle system, talking about terminology. Another one is talking about risk. Another one is talking about ethical concerns. So this standard, basically, what we had seen, the AI community needed guidance in terms of AI. They needed a straightforward document that they could apply when either developing AI systems or adopting AI systems. And that was the idea behind the standard, bringing in international best practices, international standards, and packaging it for the local community to be able to use it within their AI systems or adoption of AI. So even at its current state, we've seen that the community, the locally, okay, there's a lot of interest in the standards also because big tech brought in a lot of comments. They wanted to see will their products be affected by this standard, because now we're talking about responsibility within the document. Google was there to ask. So many organizations were there asking, even countries themselves. China was asking how they'll be affected, their products will be affected if this standard actually becomes a regulation. So, and the community also needed to know how are they going to use it as a step-by-step, practical step in developing AI. And that has what has led us to the next step, where we feel that still in its current state, it needs an additional kind of implementation guide where you are, you know where you are within the AI ecosystem. Are you just at the beginning in terms of even a developer, whether you're a developer or whether you're an adopter, you still need to have a step-by-step of what are you doing. So that's what brought us to a conversation for getting a maturity model for AI. So this maturity model, actually what it does, it brought in the certification standard. Certification was a big conversation in the industry. They kept asking us, can I get certified on this standard if I'm implementing this standard? So we decided to bring in the international certification standard and the Kenya standard and come up with a maturity model to tell someone, are you within the ecosystem in terms of risk? Are you at level 1? Are you at level 5? So that it was a practical way for organizations, for individuals to be able to rank themselves within the AI lifecycle system. So what I've seen internationally, you can have international standards, but you need to have a local way to implement these documents and package them in a way that the local community can use them, get something out of them. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Monica. I think you touched on kind of like one of the key things that we're going to discuss next, because I think that has to do with like cooperation and global interoperability and the future. Because some of the things you mentioned has to do with like how can we forge ahead? What are the way forward opportunities for cooperation? How can we build and bridge those kind of like a capacity gap that you mentioned and strengthen cooperation and regional coordination? So, Brian, let me ask you like, where do you see clearest opportunity that can be that we can leverage between kind of like regional standards development and setting, and also kind of like international framework? Where do you see the clearest opportunity for cooperation? how can we kind of like cooperate to kind of like strengthen those governance, those standards, while also taking into realities some of the kind of like key gaps, bottleneck that we discussed today?
Thank you very much for that question. I mean, I think first and foremost, I think congratulations to forums such as this and to individuals such as yourself who are championing forums for this discussion. We know that one of the biggest challenges is dissemination. As you can very well see, there's typically quite a lot of work that goes into the standards creation process. Unfortunately, as we said, it involves a bit of a few experts. So it's not just a very simple document that can then be tweeted or just can be put on media per se. I mean, it's some of it can be a bit more technical, and as you've seen, there are some efforts to try and localize and simplify them. But I think first and foremost is forums such as this, organizations such as yourself, that create that opportunity for the discussion on this great work. I think another area for us is placing ourselves within the digital context conversation in Africa. I think right now, in as much as we are pushing for these efforts from a standardization technical committee perspective, we're aware that there are conversations happening at AU level. There are various committees and commissions within the AU level that will benefit from quite a number of standards. Give you an example, just a basic example, for instance, on one of the tools, similar to what Monica was speaking about, a tool such as a data maturity model, which sets up structures on data governance and data interoperability, is integral and absolutely important at Africa level, even when you consider, for instance, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, whose basis is also internally a lot of e-commerce. E-commerce is enabled through data exchange and a lot of data exchange across the countries. And therefore, a structure such as a data maturity model is something that is a standard that needs to be discussed across all the countries, that this is what we mean by data governance, this is what we mean by privacy, this is what we mean by security, etc. The other context probably where is, for instance, a lot of work that's being done by Smart Africa. And the beauty of Smart Africa's approach is that they've been able to bring in a lot of the countries, either regionally or by country by themselves, and by giving them an area of focus to build. I think for us, one of the biggest advantages as Africa might not necessarily involve having a singular conversation on one item as 52 countries, but to actually leverage 52 countries to look at 52 different areas from a lens of a Pan-African interest. So you'll take a look at Smart Africa. For instance, they asked South Africa to create a blueprint on AI. They asked Kenya to create a blueprint on digital economy. They asked Tunisia to create a blueprint on innovation and ecosystems. So I think a similar approach such as that can leverage the strength in the plurality of Africa to actually take a look at different areas based on where the different regions and different countries have strength, and to see how, I mean, with that, we can actually use that as an opportunity to complete the massive work of creating a good body of standards that can be helpful.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing about those opportunities that we can leverage. Dr. Victor, if you have like, maybe we can also hear from you about some of like clearest opportunities, maybe building on what Brian said, some of the clearest opportunity for African kind of like an international coordination around this standard development, and what kind of like some of the capacity or coordination you think are required, briefly, that are required maybe to achieve some of those opportunities?
Yeah, thank you, Zach. Well, what I would like to say, number one, I will start from what Monica said earlier. Standards are meant to be applied. And that's us to govern what we do. If we create standards that cannot be applied, we're wasting our time. So it's important that in the design of those standards, we are understanding the competence level in the continent, and we are making sure that we're creating what our solution developers, our researchers can actually apply, our companies can actually apply. That's very important. And the other thing I see that is important is a continent of over 50 countries, 52, 54, whatever. The big players, they will not really benefit from them if we have so many different fragmented standards or whatever regulations we want to bring forward. And I don't think all the countries have enough capacity and power to also check what these big players are doing. So it's important as a continent at least to have a template, a standard that integrates all the, of course, you may not be able to tackle everything from every country, but at least something that cuts across all the countries, that we know that we are not like EU yet, but we know that this is something that if it is respected, all our countries will benefit and will fine for all of us. So I think that kind of document, that kind of standard is important, and it should be done in such a way that even though we give countries the room to have their own specific things they are still going to create, but we know that whatever we come together to create becomes something we all agreed on. And so that when we have these big players that are creating technology that we are all consuming, almost all our companies are consuming this technology, we have a good document to protect the interests of all Africans. Yeah. And it's easier also for such to be enforced, because when they see that this is still what AU or the whole African Union is saying, it's easier to prosecute when they do something wrong, yeah, than an individual country trying to. So I think that should be one of the things you should work on, ensuring that there's a template that every other country can build on. Yeah, that means once that template has taken almost everything into consideration, then there's some specific things that each country think I need to have a standard on this. Then they can build on that. But there's a general thing that has captured in this need that cuts across the whole continent. I think that is very important. So the other thing I'll conclude with from my own hand is, how do you raise capacity to be able to implement the standards? And even in creating the standards, that we're not just going to be borrowing capacity from elsewhere, the capacity, because this area is developing faster than the regulators, faster than those creating standards. So how do we ensure that we have a pipeline for this capacity building? Very, very important. If not, we will always bring standard from elsewhere and try to tweak them to our own realities. Whereas we need to actually make sure that our reality determine the foundation of the standard. Yeah. So I think that capacity building is very, very important. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Victor. So I think questions are yet to drop. So if anyone has a question, we still have like 5 minutes to round up the discussion. Or alternatively, I think I will allow one or two from the attendee who have a question to raise up their hand so that they can ask their question directly. Okay, I have Dr. Kripos. So I will allow you so that you can ask your question. Okay, sorry if I did not call your name correctly. Dr. Kripos, over to you. You can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Fantastic. So I just want to know, I'm part of the Think Ethics and Governance team, and I want to know how the whole process of standardization will come together with the aspect of AI ethics that is now growing globally and should also be taking off continentally here in Africa. Are they going to work together? Because standardization is already, I think, a bit ahead. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Crispus. Anyone from our panelists who want to respond to the question?
Maybe I can respond to that. So standards, AI standards, like I said, take into consideration all characteristics of the AI life cycle. And ethics is part and parcel of what AI is right now. So I think what going forward, we should not develop policies, strategies, standards in silos. So when you're developing like ethical principles and applying them, you should basically look at what does the standard say. And if you're developing a standard that includes ethical issues, you need it to speak to any other policy, any other regulation, any other strategy that you're coming up with, so that we have we are speaking with one unified governance voice. So I guess that is what governance is, making sure that everybody who is in the governance conversation is speaking with one voice. So I don't know, that's one of the challenges we have, where people are having different AI conversations in different areas, but speaking about governance, which is supposed to be one umbrella under which they're speaking about AI. So yeah, I think that would be my response.
Okay, thank you, Monica. So we have one question here. We'll just take it briefly, very briefly, then we can round up the session about capacity. So how can we build this capacity that we are talking about? Maybe Brian, you wanted to say one thing. Then Dr. Victor, also there is a question here. Also, I think it has to do with like coordination and capacity. So if like maybe we're able now to have like a regional blueprint, how can we align it also with the international one? Or how can we avoid kind of like a fragmentation so that we can do more harmonized kind of like framework? Brian, then the Victor, 1 or 2 words that we can run off.
Yeah, I mean, the question of capacity building is it's a big question, and I think it's a question all around. I think for us, it's basically prioritization, but there's an easier answer to this, which is to really ask the leadership to prioritize and kind of offer resourcing for purposes of capacity building. But I think for me, also being that I'm part of a community-driven tech innovator network, is to actually speak to individuals who are experts. We ourselves who are techies, to take it upon ourselves as a responsibility. First and foremost, to build our private capacity as ourselves, and also to get involved in the standardization process, be it at technical committee level, at national standards bodies, and by extension into the Africa space. So I think personally for me, I think this is capacity building also for individuals at institutional level, such as Dr. Victor, to offer it as a priority, to, let's say, even carry some courses and capacity build tech innovators into this space. Because the risk of not having that capacity or not being part of the conversation is that the standards are still going to be set. And they'll probably be set with us being in the room or with us not being in the room. And I think in such a way, we can probably take it as a private or as a personal initiative for each and every one of us.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Dr. Victor, one or two words so that we can honor.
Thank you. I'll pick it up from where Brian stopped. Very important, and which I think may address the question regarding the question directed to me. So first of all, the standard is set, and you have to confirm. I mean, if not, you are not certified. But if you have issues, I think you can, like the questionnaire, the person that raised the question said, I mean, you can actually seek an exemption. But I think what's important is how do we participate in this standard setting? That was what Brian was saying. We need, because if people that know about it are not participating, then the people that are setting it will set what they think it should be for us, whether it is imported or it's locally created or curated. So I think participating more in the process is very important, so that when a document comes out, I say this is a standard, it represents what the standard should be. And I think also those certain standards should have more of engagement with all the stakeholders as well before it becomes a certified document that people should begin to look at. So more engagement will help us to shaping those standards very well. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Victor, for that insight. And to our panelists and to our attendee, thank you everyone for joining this session. It's quite kind of like engaging, and I hope like we'll continue to build on these foundations and to see how we can actually meaningfully contribute to this norm setting and how we can implement them effectively in the African region. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great day and evening ahead. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.